Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and get started? Again, thank you everybody for being here and for hosting us today. We're really happy and excited to be here. Lan and I have been having conversations with the Blue CD2 team the last, few months, and so we're really excited to be able to share some stuff with you guys. So we move on to some introductions. Lan, you can go first. If you guys click through it on the presentation, you can see our pictures.
Yeah, I'll go through and list the slide number that I'm on if that's helpful. So I'm on slide 3. Again, my name is Lan Sena. I always tell folks my name is Lan, like Land of Enchantment, without the D. Um, I am the Chief Strategy Officer for the Center for Civic Policy and for the Center Civic Action. Civic Policies are C3, Civic Actions are C4. I have been with the org since 22, and before that, I was a city councilor for Albuquerque. And I'll pass it to Luis.
Yeah, and then if you click on slide 4, that's my picture. Again, Luis Guerrero, him. I'm the campaigns director for Center for Civic Policy / Center for Civic Action. I live in Las Cruces. I have married. We have 5 pets. I've been with the organization since last year, early 2024. But before that, I worked for the Sierra Club for a few years, and then before that, I was a political consultant. So I've been around, the world of New Mexico politics for a while. So anyway, now we're gonna talk a little bit about our own history as an organization. So Lan, go ahead.
Thanks, Luis. So I'm gonna skip through. I'm on slide 5, just some of our logos, but on slide 6, you should be seeing kind of a timeline. And we're gonna go all the way back to some dark, dark years in New Mexico. And just talk about the dynamics and how we've been framed as a purple state. As we saw our federal delegation, it wasn't as blue as it was or is today. And thinking through of just some of our work, even for CCP and CCA, existing around this time. Back in 2007, 2008, coming into Obama's election. And what's highlighted there on the very bottom, when we look at our Senate, Pro Tem Jennings, for folks that remember him, was the mayor of Roswell. He was a Democrat. He sued Tim Jennings, if folks remember, because he was against the current map that represents Congressional District 2. And we knew coming into even 2011 what we were really up against when Susana Martinez came into power, right? And how we were really stalled out for New Mexico and the progress that we were seeing. And when we come into even 2013 into 2014, how we lost the House for the first time in our state legislature in a very, very long time. You'll see a picture of Sam Bregman because he was actually the chair of the Democratic Party back then, and he actually ended up resigning as party chair because of the loss that he saw. So dealing with this in 2013, we also saw the corporate tax rate get repealed for New Mexico. So we were in pretty dark times and tough shape. But we knew for the Center for Civic Policy and Action of some of the things that we've been fighting for over a decade, like the constitutional amendment for the Land Grant Permanent Fund to fund universal childcare, which we're all celebrating today, and it's all over the news in the nation, and how we're talking about how New Mexico is leading on that front. But it took over a decade to get there, and because of this. So if you go to slide 7, you really see about some of the work we did, because we knew of the components, and we knew that New Mexico wasn't being clearly representative. So afterwards, we got some folks, a lot of these corporate Dems, like Mary Kay Papin, who had represented her district for a very long time, right? And for a district that was in CD2, that is currently in CD2, she was one of the corporate Dems that prevented that vote.
I think now we can do it. Okay, yes, we can. All right.
Yay!
I did
All
not
right.
mean to quote Obama, but you know, that's where we are. Okay, cool. So now y'all should be able to see like the screen that Lan was talking about.
Okay, you might want to go one back, Luis. Yep, here we go. You might want to exit out of that permission there.
Yeah.
There you go. So at the bottom here, this picture of Mary Kay Papin, right? We worked to also get her out of office. We also worked to get Suchil Torres Small to also represent Congressional District 2. We did a lot of work for the No Corporate Dems in 2020, which took out Mary Kay Papin and a lot of these corporate Dems who stalled the progress of New Mexico, and thankfully so, because we also are seeing, right, with the Dobbs decision and how they were also up against the repeal of the ban on for abortion, right? So we were facing with reproductive health issues, the land grant permanent fund, and really not reflecting our values of New Mexico. So we came in under the name of No Corporate Dems, took out a lot of folks, and really leading into the framework and census and redistricting to get Congressional District 2 to look like what it does today. And really, the work that we did, we really intersected on policy, on House and Senate votes, state House and state Senate. And so really working towards the blue trifecta that we have today, the blue representation that we have on our federal delegation as well. And so if you go to the next slide, I won't play this video for the purpose of time, but it's one of our ads that we also created for No Corporate Dems. It's really fun to check out because it also lays out some of the work that we've done. But next slide. Oh, I think it's just gonna play. There you go. So, right, because we took out these corporate Democrats, because we had a more representative state Senate and state House, you know, we saw some of these wins. Of course, these are pictures from a lot of the protest because of the Dobbs decision, right? And thankfully that we were able to repeal that really antiquated abortion language in our state constitution. So, next slide. We worked on census and redistricting for, again, this is speaking for Center for Civic Policy on our C3 side. And we mobilized folks to come out to speak to their needs, to see that we wanted a congressional district that was more representative of our communities. We broke up oil and gas, and we also made it a big part of our community outreach and public comment, even to have our Indigenous communities reflected through redistricting as well. So the new map and what we know as today as CD2 was really through our work, and was the Senate had, sorry, the legislature had passed this map because of our efforts. And if you go to the next slide, again, through our work, through both our C3 and C4 work, we were able to pass the constitutional amendment for the Land Grant Permanent Fund to fund universal early child care. And we won with 70% of the vote. And with this campaign, it was also layered into Gabe's race in 22. So this was a ballot initiative that we also did a lot of outreach for unlikely voters. We got over 1,000 folks to turn out who traditionally had not before, because of not just this issue and because of Gabe's race, but our outreach had been year round. And that's something that we constantly stress. So if you go to the next slide. So some of our wins because of this, in thinking of not just our political strategy, but just policy as well. Being able to pass the first in the nation, the New Mexico Voting Rights Act. That also included first in the nation, the Native American Voting Rights Act. And now, this past July, we saw secure automatic voter registration, which was a policy within the New Mexico Voting Rights Act, that now anytime anyone engages with the MVD or signs up for Medicare, Medicaid, they're automatically registered to vote, and now they have to opt out. You're registered as a decline to state unless you clearly dictate which party you wish to be a part of. And that was through a lot of our effort. We also passed the permanent absentee ballot list and a lot of other components that we continue to benefit from today. We also pushed for the New Mexico Match Fund. So a lot of localities didn't have the bonding capacity or the upfront budget to pay for federal grants that which would eventually get reimbursed. So even like CARES money or ARPA money, the bipartisan infrastructure law, when you were trying to redo a bridge or road, a lot of our rural communities didn't even have the money to pay for it to get reimbursed later by the federal government through those federal law and policies. So we created the New Mexico Match Fund to really solve some of those issues. So that's really our component when it comes to our C3 side for the Center for Civic Policy. But I want to now pivot on to our work for our C4s. So you heard a lot that in our primary work and how we got rid of a lot of corporate Democrats. Well, that's the thing about NMS and a lot of our partner orgs and for Center for Civic Action is that we do not play in party politics, where we don't do vote blue no matter who, but we do vote and support candidates who clearly reflect the values of New Mexicans. So sometimes even in our process, we're not just engaging in the general election, but a lot of our work is also in the primaries, as you heard that we got rid of Mary Kay Papin and a few other corporate Democrats. So here we flipped, we got rid of a lot of our incumbents, we did mailers, even myself was on an ad in a mailer as well. But that's not all that we do. We don't just always go negative. We also do positive work as well. If you go to the next slide. We really uplift a lot of our champions because we know that they are clearly there to represent New Mexico values. Sometimes we actually, part of our organizations and our partners, we do recruitment, we do trainings, we do campaign management. We also have a campaign management school. And so we really think through all of the intersectionalities as it comes and relates to a candidate, policies and strategies and the politics of it all. So here are some of the mailers as examples of the folks that we supported and really uplifted a lot of our champions. Next slide. So again, because of this work, it's really resulted in progressive policy and action. We saw the governor sign our Healthy Workforce Act, or also known as paid sick leave. We're getting national attention, shout outs from Bernie Sanders, folks really thinking through their own races in this moment because of that. We also capped small loan interest rates at 36%. And for folks who are saying like, wow, that's still a lot. It was originally up to 175% on some of these predatory loans. And the 36% is actually tied to interest rates that they cap for our military. And that's how the policy was aligned in that way. So it also translated to not just legislative seats and congressional districts and congressional races. It also resulted in real policy change that impacts New Mexicans every single day. So next slide. Coming into the work of 2024, you're going to hear a lot of our work in 2024. This is also some of our timelines about how we also engage in municipal elections, which we're currently undergoing, and thinking through how turnout could look like from our municipal into our statewide races and even our congressional race. I'm not going to go too much into that. I'm really going to be focusing on our 2024 work and the work we did for GATE as well. So I'm going to turn it now over to Oh, no, I think I'm gonna keep going, actually. Now I'm gonna talk about what is NMS? What is our C4? And what are we rooted in? What are our values? Really thinking through a coalition of groups. I believe we're at 26 C4 partners. You'll see some of them listed later. And really redefining political power for New Mexico communities using an equitable and inclusive approach. Our communities can see themselves reflected in our democracy. Our really guiding values are trust, intentionality, equity, autonomy, community power, and leadership development. And of course, you can learn more through our website. Next slide. Next slide. These are some of our NMS partners. And again, as I talked a lot about our work and the timeline, we did this in coalition with one another. CCP and CCA did not just do it alone. We worked across our 48 partner orgs on our C3 side, and then of course our 26 partners that are listed here. Next slide. So what do we do? What are our policy issue areas? It's essentially everything. Everything you can think about, we do, and federal, state, and local. So our hands are pretty much in every level of government. Next slide. So now I want to go into our 2024 work. And if you go to the next slide, this is one narrative that a lot of folks have been hearing, have been seeing, have been talked about. This narrative that we as a nation have shifted to the right, and that candidates should do so too. That the policies and where we're at politically as a nation, we're just completely on this pendulum swing further to the right than we ever have. And for us here in New Mexico, we say, that's not our narrative. That is not what reflects what we're seeing here in New Mexico. And that's really what we'll be talking about in terms of what we've done and what we've seen here. Next slide. Indivisible is not one of our partners on our C4 side, to John's question in the chat. Here's another lesson, is that when we do our work, when we are engaged with our communities, what do we see? We win. If you kind of click through, Louise. We're winning across the board, and our turnout when we are engaged in this work, when we're canvassing, when we're talking to voters, and how we're hearing it in New Mexico is different from the narrative that you're hearing nationally. Go to the next slide. So, like I said, we also work in our primaries, and of all the primaries that we, and the races that we were focused on, we won 90%. 10 out of 12 House races, 6 out of 6 Senate races, and 3 out of 3 counties. When we go into the general election of our target districts, 73% of our general election races were won. You see in our House races and our Senate races, and of course, 1 out of 1 on our priority congressional race, which was CD2. I'll go more in depth about that further down into the slides, but I wanted to now kind of talk specifically about CD2. Next slide. So we know that Gabe won by 52%. But what does that really look like as we dig deeper into those election results? If you go to the next slide, I know you all presented to the Indivisible conference about why Vasquez won over Harris. So this is the entire congressional district 2. In the darker green, this is where Harris has outperformed Vasquez. And in the lighter shades of yellowish orange, Vasquez outperforms Harris. Again, this is CD2. If you go to the next slide, however, when we compare him to Heinrich's race in the US Senate, right? When Heinrich outperforms Vasquez in the darker purple, and where Vasquez outperforms Heinrich in the kind of lightish pinkish salmon. This is again the entire composition of CD2 and how they overlap. And so we wanted to even look at this further. So if you go into the next slide, we're looking at Bernalillo. This, again, where Harris has outperformed Vasquez and Vasquez outperforms Harris. This is for Bernalillo County. And in the next slide, you'll see Vasquez versus Heinrich and how Heinrich outperforms Vasquez. And again, we'll talk about what does this really mean. But if you go to the next slide, where Doña Ana County, Harris versus Vasquez, and of course, Gabe Vasquez was a former city councilor for Las Cruces. Name ID would be higher. But if you look at Doña Ana, in the next slide, sorry, for Heinrich versus Vasquez, again, just highlighting there. Another way to look at it, if you look at the next slide, on a scatter plot, where exactly is Heinrich and Gabe in terms of turnout and support? If you go to the next slide, you'll see Gabe versus Kamala Harris. So if you go to the next slide, what does this all really mean? Taken together, the model suggests that Vasquez's relative strength comes primarily from BIPOC heavy areas, or Black, Indigenous, people of color heavy areas, and where he gains ground against both opponents, especially Harris. On a county level analysis, it highlights that his margin shifts differently between Bernalillo and Doña Ana, of course, depending on the opponent. That's Harris versus Heinrich. And while rural and non-rural analysis shows Heinrich's relative advantage in rural precincts, right? So with this layered approach, just of course, it depends on geography. Harris was vulnerable in diverse precincts, but Heinrich maintains more resilience in rural areas, meaning that Heinrich outperformed Vasquez in rural areas. So for me, that interpretation means a few things. That where Heinrich has run left of Gabe, even in rural areas, he actually wins. Heinrich wins. He outperforms Gabe. And where Gabe Vasquez has outperformed them is actually in areas of BIPOC heavy communities. And what does that really mean? It really means also, to the next slide, that we did a lot of work in CD2. Our focus in 2024, again, was really outreaching to our BIPOC heavy community, unlikely voters, and layering it with a lot of the other work that we did. And I'll pass it off to Luis for that. But as you can see, because of the work we did, and we saw an increase in every county in terms of votes. And I will kick it now to Luis.
Yeah, thanks, Lan. Yeah, and with kind of piggybacking out of that, last portion, right? Like, so a lot of our work, using, so I'm going to use this slide as an example. I know there's a lot of numbers, a lot of graphs. We've given you guys a lot of information, and some of it I think is probably harder to digest just because it's a lot of numbers and stuff. But we look at this, and this is a lot of how we decide, like what strategies we should recommend we should do. So much of Gabe's district, as we all know, is so large, so big. It's the biggest congressional district like in the nation, and land mass, not so much population size, but definitely land mass. And so it covers a wide variety of seats, and these are some of the seats that are nested within that district. Um, and so, we had a lot of partners. I'll use, like Semilla, Action, or Cafe as an example, right? They were canvassing for, actually, no, I'll use Semilla because I don't think Cafe actually wasn't canvassing for Gabe. But, Semilla, for example, was canvassing in places like, uh, you know, Kerry Hamlin's district or Nathan Small's district or Sarah Silva's district in Chaparral. And, while, asking for support of those candidates, they also were asking for support of Gabe because, it kind of all goes hand in hand. And so we saw a higher turnout of participation in districts where our partners were involved. As Lan said, we talked a lot to so I had worked in campaigns and Democratic campaigns for a number of years, and there's always like the demographic that campaigns go for, right? They go for regular voters, like people that have voted in past elections, but there's a lot of people that get left out of that conversation, specifically, BIPOC people get left out of that conversation a lot because, in some situations, right, there you might have anything from people that might be new to the area. People like that work 2, 3 jobs, then, have kids and may have other things. And so, being current with elections is not always in everybody's top mind. So, we did a lot of community outreach. Our partners talked to a lot of folks just out in the community, knocked doors, went to rural areas to knock on doors, which if you've ever canvassed in, places like Chaparral as an example, it is a little hard. Houses are very spread apart. Sometimes it's kind of hard to find the address, even if you have your minivan app or whatever you're using or your map. It's hard sometimes, and so we did a lot of that. Same with the Senate as well. These are some of the districts, of course, again that were kind of nested in that area, and we did see an increase, not just in those specific districts, but in CD2 as well. Um, this is also just, kind of to piggyback back on the 2024 and all the work we did. We did see a pretty big change in the demographics of the New Mexico House and New Mexico Senate. We increased in the number of, we lost one Democrat, but we increased in the number of progressives, and that was done through, winning primaries. We increased in the number of women in the House and in the Senate, as well as people of color and women of color, which New Mexico is actually leading right now on the House side specifically, having a super majority of women of color in the New Mexico Roundhouse, which is really beautiful because you don't see that in a lot of other places in the country. New Mexico is leading the charge when it comes to that. We still need some work in the Senate, of course, and we'll be working on some of those elections when they come around as well. But but we're getting there. Of course, money. Right, money is as you all know, right? You guys just had a big fundraiser. It was really successful, and that's really exciting. I'm really excited for you all for, raising a lot of money. We have to do a lot of that as well on our end. We work with the New Mexico Donor Table, which is it's a group of nationwide funders that, look at elections, look at narratives. We have a couple of folks in the state that really go out to bat for our organizations and our narrative and our very unique New Mexico story. And so yeah, we put the money that we got where our mouth is, right? So 4 million, more than $4.5 million spent in the 2024 election alone is not chump change, right? And that was all kind of spread in between a number of organizations that did work. So um also, I love this slide just kind of because I feel very proud of it. Is that, our groups mitigated Trump's gain in 2024, right? We know the overall very unfortunate turnout of 2024 is that Trump ended up winning the election. But in New Mexico, like Kamala still won. And again, when we go back and look at that initial slide that Land showed of the two different narratives of, the DC consultants that will tell you that, everybody's shifting to the right and we're losing progressives left and right. And it's like in a place like New Mexico, that's not necessarily true, right? We also have the narrative of people actually are showing up. People are actually wanting elected officials in Congress and the House and City Council and their county commissioner that not only look like them, but have lived experiences like them. Um, and that's pretty much it of the presentation. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can all look at each other. But yeah, thanks for watching.
Oh, well, thank you so much, both of you. It's really inspiring. It was really exciting. And I think we have a lot, we have a lot to learn from you. I have a bunch of questions, but I see Carlene has her hand up. So why don't you go first, Carlene?
Hey guys, this is fascinating. So you've convinced me Do you guys share this data with candidates also?
So
Yeah, so
yes.
go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead, Lan. You can answer it.
Typically we do something called a walls down meeting, right? So because legal purposes, you can only talk about past elections, right? You can't talk about coordination, you can't talk about strategy. So usually, typically after the election, depending on where we are in the session, usually after session, we're able to do a walls down meeting. And so we meet with the candidates, we'll meet with leadership to actually outline a lot of this work. Sometimes we meet, even for like our state house or state senate races, we also do a deeper dive if it's aside from leadership. But we've done 4 now with Gabe Vasquez at this point.
Yeah, and and to that too, I mean, like we have legal limitations why we can't work in coordination with candidates during election cycle, right? So all of our groups do an independent expenditure. So, that basically puts like a wall in between us and their campaigns, and so we can't really talk to them.
We're the same kind of
Um,
pack that you are.
yeah, exactly,
So
exactly. So yeah, so so we can't talk to them, but we can talk about the past, and and yeah, we have another thing also, just kind of to mention on that front is that we uh, 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 not everybody, but a group of the organizations do kind of like a joint endorsement questionnaire, not a joint endorsement process. It's a joint endorsement questionnaire, right? So we have I think it's about 8 organizations that, every election cycle, at least for the last few ones, we've been sending out a questionnaire to candidates. Then they send it back, and from there, their memberships vote and decide. But it covers a lot of things, and those are things that also help inform us on the positions that these candidates have, right? Because sometimes you don't know what a candidate stands for, and so it really helps inform a lot.
I think this is fascinating. I had really no idea what you guys did, and I'm floored, actually. This is wonderful to learn about what you're doing, and particularly in CD2, because of course that's where we're focused also, and to see your feeling, your analysis of it was quite interesting. In fact, I'm hoping
Earl,
you'll
yeah.
share your slideshow with us, although we are recording this, so we'll probably have it anyway.
Earl, you have a question?
Very briefly, I mean, I think this is great what you guys have done. Outstanding. Um, I've done a lot of work looking at the data, the registration and everything else by districts and everything. So you presented some information in terms of voter turnout and everything else like that for the election. Do you have the delta? In other words, do you have what has changed? You presented sort of a snapshot of what occurred in 2024, but do you have an idea that how that of the delta? When I say delta, you understand what I'm saying. I'm looking for what changed and what can you attribute to that change, and do you have that kind of information? So, for instance, 2024 was a presidential election. All right. 2022 was not. So, what's the delta? And then what's the delta between 2020 and 2024? And so, what changed? And do you have any idea of what attributed to that change?
I have
I
a
can
few
kind of
thoughts, but I don't know,
go
Luis,
ahead.
did you wanna?
Yeah.
Um,
Does that my question make sense?
Yeah.
it does. Lan, you can go first because you're probably gonna say something better than me.
Well, there are a few components, right? I think in 22 was the new congressional map. A lot of folks
Right,
didn't know they
exactly.
were redistricted, but at the same time, we did a huge, massive effort to do issue education ahead of time. But on top of that, like we said, we layered it with also this constitutional amendment. And it won 70% of the vote. It won more than any candidate as an issue, which is something we were also pressing to a lot of our candidates that we're also running, is to say when you're running on these issues, it's not so much you, it's the things that you stand for that really motivates people to come out. So we saw some of that in 22. Of course, also, you know, COVID was still happening. So I think that was also another component. But as we saw motivations for 2024 with this presidential election, we also saw a lot of people fall off in their support for Gabe Vasquez as well. So you can kind of see even where he lost votes, even where he should have gained votes, right? For example, you know, Doña Ana County in Las Cruces, where he was formerly a city councilor, he should have had that name recognition. He lost about 3,000 votes compared to some of his other state races, right? So like Joanne Ferrari, Rubio, Cadena, he lost a lot of support. So he should have gained 3,000 votes, roughly, give or take. Some of them he did outperform in terms of turnout. I think part of it is also, again, name recognition, like some of the precincts that were part of Sarah Silva's, for example, we saw that he outperformed her in terms of the race. But I think some of the change is, to exactly your point, Earl, is like there's a presidential race. More folks are maybe a little bit more motivated. And some of the changes that we saw between 22 and 24, which we will always see. And one thing to even mention as part of that, because what we're doing and what we often do is door knocking year round. We don't just focus in on elections. And so some of this, like, folks have already done a lot of that outreach. And I think part of it too is that some folks were willing to take a chance on Congressman Vasquez, right, in 22. And when it comes to 24, they were like, well, you know, we don't really like some of this representation, but we'll give him another shot. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be true on a third term, but I think those are some of the layered components. Luis, do you have anything to add?
No, that was good.
Yeah, just to be clear, when you say you layered the message, say between childcare and a specific candidate, does that mean like a postcard went out that mentioned both the childcare amendment and the candidate's name, or what do you mean by layering?
Yeah, so as we do issue education, we get, right, some the voter information. We folks who knocked on the door that did the vote yes for kids. They were also very familiar when they came back and were like, hey, it's me again, for the candidate. But we also did, it wasn't just canvassing, because of course we know that a lot of the district's very large. Sometimes mailers also aren't great for rural communities either. So we did radio, we did social digital ads. And again, sometimes that works better, right? Some folks don't have traditional mailboxes, specifically in CD2. So for the vote yes for
we
kids,
know that.
right? Yeah, exactly. So for the vote yes for kids, same thing. A lot of what we did to talk about that issue, we used the same strategies, sort of.
Yeah. I think Leora, you were next, and then Sally, and then I have 20 questions if there's any time left. Leora, you're muted, Leora. You're still muted.
That off. Okay, here we go. Anyway, thank you. It's great hearing this full presentation. I've heard pieces of it, and it was really wonderful to have it all pulled together. I'm really interested in knowing what you guys are thinking of in terms of voter registration for the 20, from now on. Is that something that you're working on? And part of the question is there any way, I mean, we're hoping over time there's ways we can collaborate on, because we're also very interested in that area, see whether there's ways we can partner that would be beneficial to both of us.
Yeah, I mean, on our C3 side, civic engagement is our bread and butter. We will always be pushing out. We always do GOTVs. If you really think through, though, however, one thing that we've been flagging is that opposition is doing a really good job registering Republicans. And even something that we flagged for some of our DC folks is that some of the DC consultants who weren't in touch with some of our on the ground folks gave money to outside consultants that registered more Republicans in CD2 when they were supposed to be registering Democrats. And so those are some of the faults as well, right? And we're telling them because when you hire outside consultants like that and who don't know the community, of course, you're going to have some of those results. We're really, charged again to think through that. And we're utilizing some of the work that we're already doing, right, in some of our municipal races. But we've seen historically municipal races have actually a very low turnout. So what's going to motivate them for a statewide? Now, granted, in 26, we'll have an opportunity for a new governor and a few other folks that are termed out. But again, the question will be what will be driving voters to come out and vote. And we're seeing across the board of folks who are not registering as Democrats or refusing to or switching parties to decline to state. So I think it's a big lift, and we're sticking on message on our point and we're doing the work. But like we said, I'm not so sure the Democratic Party is.
Okay. Yeah, Sally, you're not up.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you for the work you did to put the district map in place. That was fabulous. But secondly, I'm really interested in your description of New Mexico voters not headed for Trump, with that map with all the movement red. And you said you're not seeing that in New Mexico. And I wondered if you'd go a little deeper in that, what you're seeing and how it's different, and why do you think it's different in New Mexico?
Well, I can give an opinion, right? So it's it's not so much that New Mexico is not turning to the right. It's, I think it's more just people, people want solutions, people want representation, I think we're in an era right now, and not so much to use Trump as an example, but just like in general, right? And US democracy, we're in an era right now where people, yeah, they're tired of politics as usual. They're tired of the same answers, like I can one of the things, like I feel kind of blunt about sometimes, it's like even like, if you look at like Gabe as an example, right? And he's taken some hard votes. And I know, we're all here wanting to support him and we want him to continue winning. But at the same time, it's like, people are wanting a solution and they want to know, hey, why should I keep voting for this person? And I think we're seeing that also just like in turnout of Republicans and Democrats as well. Yeah, that's just kind of an opinion. I don't know, Lan, if you have like any, anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I think Luis is right? When we talk about the issues and the things that we're facing in New Mexico, folks do want solutions. They don't want to be pandered to. And I think oftentimes what we're seeing even with candidates is that they're believing that voters are just not well educated. And it's not true, right? They're like, oh, well, that one doesn't really matter or it doesn't really count for a resolution. Folks feel that. Whatever statement that resolution was conveying to our communities. And part of what we're seeing, because of where we're trying to say, like, it's not so much that folks have shifted and become Republicans, it's because, again, they're facing so much economic strife, right? We're seeing that people who are working 2 jobs and still can't afford their health care. And what we have seen and what we do on the C3 side, we do deep listening. So we go out to a lot of New Mexico. We're even striving away from our more urban centers, thinking of rural voters. And then we just have conversations with them and we really do deep listening, but we track that. So we talk to them the way that they talk about issues. For our policy wonks like myself, I'm like, oh yeah, food insecurity is really high in New Mexico. But what does that mean for everyday New Mexicans? It means New Mexicans are now having to choose between meals and prescriptions. And so we talk about that and we capture that, and we actually, I'll share it in the chat, developed the narrative project. So we frame issues and talk about issues and tell candidates and our partners, this is how New Mexicans are talking about it. This is how we're meeting their needs where they are. And it's a 60-page document. We did a new, this is the latest version off of the 2024 election as well. So we're hearing of what New Mexicans are facing. And so when we talk to candidates, you know, even as you saw of my presentation of why Gabe carried more than Harris, right? He was able to convey a message to New Mexicans and that New Mexicans related to him, while for Harris didn't exactly do that well for New Mexico. And we've gave even Harris's campaign teams some just talking points, right? They saw the narrative project. And for them to not be able to translate that resonated with New Mexicans while other folks did kind of shows that it's not necessarily blue on red, but what we're even seeing when we do a deeper dive, whether it's by the House district or the Senate district, even going deeper into a precinct level and talking with these folks of asking them what's motivating them. And again, we're always doing that. We're doing that even now with our local races to hear of what we may anticipate coming as issues for the statewide. And again, we're also framing it even into the legislative session and advocating like, hey, this is what we're hearing. If they don't see this in policy and they don't see this from their government, distrust of government is already there. We may not see that same motivation to get folks to vote in 2026. So it's a multi-layered strategy that we have to always be thinking about, and how we talk about it with voters and thinking of new ways about that too. How are we translating it? How are we talking about it? Even to young voters, we're really engaged with now as well across the district, and also forming another table really focused with our youth population.
How can I just follow
Sure,
up a
yeah,
little?
absolutely.
I just wonder also whether you saw in New Mexico, people were caught up in the kind of anti-immigrant and the border sort of hysteria that Trump created. Did you see that, or was that different than, say, you would see in Arizona and likely Texas? But I just, yeah, love to hear
Yeah.
that.
So we also actually, as part of our work, we do a landscape poll. We get questions from all of our partner orgs, and we do polling, and we ask certain questions. So when we asked a question of like, do you believe that our immigrant population should have healthcare? They're like, oh no, it would skew more to say no, we don't support that. But when we got more specific as part of that, it's like, well, do you support if immigrants have the opportunity to pay into a system because they currently do not? Then they're like, oh yeah, no, we support that. So it's interesting as we do some of this deep dives, as we do some of the landscape polling, and it's how the question's framed. And yes, people are saying that we want more border security, but at the same time, we don't want families to be torn apart. So I think as we talk about it with New Mexicans again, and telling and emphasizing that like what we're seeing on a national level and this rhetoric, it does not translate the same for New Mexico. If you look through the narrative project, some of our like biggest values that New Mexicans support is family. And we don't want families to be torn apart. We don't want to see the terror that we're really seeing on our streets when it comes to ICE and Border Patrol. So that narrative does not ring true here, that we're against like overall. But again, sometimes it's kind of how you frame the question.
Thank you.
And additionally, like if I can just add real quick, because I gave this example earlier in a different meeting that we had. CD2 I think is a perfect example of kind of like that microcosmos, right? Like it is a huge district, but it's also very diverse in the way of thinking district, right? So, like where I live in Las Cruces, or even like, further south in like southern Doñana County, right? Where people are actually like families are actually scared to like go to work or like send their kids to school because they're afraid like, hey, what if I never see my family again, right? And so that's a pretty strong sentiment here. There's a lot of distrust when it comes to ICE and Border Patrol. And, I heard someone mention it, like people here call it like the Gestapo, just like, just because that's what it feels like, whereas, like there's might be other regions like maybe a little more to like the eastern part of New Mexico, or even like like in the western part and like Lordsburg and Hidalgo counties and those areas, right, where the conversation of border security is a lot different, right, than it is in well, I mean, Hidalgo is pretty, does border with Mexico as well, but just you almost see kind of like different regions within a region. um and places like Arizona, for example, are, totally different, right? And not all Arizona is the same. Like if you go to Tucson, the culture in Tucson is actually a lot more similar, I think, to like southern New Mexico than it is to like the Phoenix area. Same with California, like the bordering areas of San Diego are totally different than if you go further up in LA, So it just kind of changes. And I think, that's one of the things that we always need to be mindful, when we're working with candidates, talking to voters as well, is like feelings on one issue can vary a lot from just even one county to another. Like I live in Doña Ana County. If I drive an hour from here to Alamogordo, it's a totally different world out there, and if you keep driving further to Lincoln County, like it just keeps changing. So, just I think New Mexico is a perfect example of how diverse one landmass can be, and it's still, and it's still the same. It's still represented by the same people.
I want to ask Alana a question. You represented the West Side in the Albuquerque City Council. You live on the West Side. The West Side, for those of you who don't know Albuquerque, is 40 years old, maybe not much older than that. It's all new developments. There are no deep-seated historical pockets of poverty, I don't think, unless they're hidden away, hidden way up on the mesa and stuff like that. But I think of it as school teachers. My dental hygienist lives on the West Side. The guy who fixes my plumbing lives on the West Side. I always kind of ask when people come to work on the house where they live. They live on the West Side, or work on me. And how does one organize? It doesn't have a history. It doesn't have a history of political organization, I don't think. So I'm just wondering, how does one work the West Side? Because it's maybe a quarter of the population of CD2.
Yeah, so what's fascinating in some of the redistricting that we did in 22, a quarter of Albuquerque's population shifted to the west side. So much so that we had to change the city council districts to come into the west side because of that change. So when we look at that, like who's moving here and what are the changes that we do see? And I will mention though, that much of the west side and even my old council district actually predates the city. So it is actually pretty old and pretty well established. And even for the Atrisco land grant that more of the CD2 actually represents is has been there for a long time. And some of that political strife, to be honest, is there because of the lack of representation that they really had then. And it wasn't until when I came into council, which was 2020, for folks that don't know, my predecessor, Ken Sanchez, died. The mayor appointed me, and my first day on city council was to declare a public health emergency. So I really not just drank from the fire hose. I drank from the fire hose after swimming an Olympic-sized pool. So I was really thrown into the thick of it. And so what we saw even for my council district, even with its change now with the council district the way it is that when we saw during the pandemic, the area and population that was being impacted the most by COVID, because they were all essential workers, to your point, Hal, like the folks who were doing the work and coming out here, they all really lived in deep pockets of the West Side. So when we talk about political organizing, we have the West Side Democrats, they're still around. They had an office, yep, I know, that's Carlene, shout out to her. They're still there, and a lot of times, even for the West Side, a lot of folks organized by neighborhood associations. Even the one that I live in now actually existed because the Walmart that was being built off of Coors and I-40, our neighbors all got together and sued the city and the developers for them to not build because they were in violation of their own building codes. And then Walmart sued the neighbors with slap suits of 5 million each to shut us up, and we didn't stop. So, you know, that's really how even I myself got involved in politics, was through neighborhood organizing and seeing that really it was corporations that were pushing small folks, small businesses, our neighbors out and out of this political process. So there are a lot of us who are still around there on the west side. I endorsed Gabe when I was a city councilor, and we actually, one of the first times I met him in person, and that's how I actually met him, is because all of the city councilors across the state were jumping on Zoom calls to talk to each other about what we were doing to address the pandemic needs. So it was myself, it was folks like Joanna Bencomo, like Gabe Vasquez, Danny Bernal. We were all jumping on Zoom calls to talk to each other, and that's how I met Gabe. So when I met him in person, it was actually to drive him throughout the city council district and his new district of Bernalillo to say, these are the needs of the community and this is what we're hearing. So you know, there's a lot of us and we're very deeply rooted, but we're also very focused in on being essential workers and pushing back on this corporate takeover essentially of the West Side. So
Yeah. Does Gabe have enough of a presence on the west side?
well, if you look at that map,
I mean, I know it's his
Bernalillo,
district, but I'm saying, you know, when I look at his newsletter, I'm just wondering if you feel he knows you're there. And it's a hard question. Maybe it's an unfair question, but I was not impressed during the last election when I went out to canvass. I was just not impressed with the organization, frankly.
yeah, I mean, overall in Bernalillo, and again, I feel like it's hard because of the land mass and where he needs to go all the time. But when we also look at the share of votes, right, in terms of Bernalillo, even Doña Ana, and where he's losing votes, the case could be made to pitch to him, right, of putting some more focus there in the future. But again, even if we look at the slide 29 for Vasquez versus Heinrich in Bernalillo, he's outperforming him. Heinrich is outperforming Vasquez, right, in Bernalillo.
So
Yeah, and I can say, you know, like, I mean, not Albuquerque, but you know, like how, like, the same thing you're saying, like it was said a lot in Las Cruces as well during the last election, right? People didn't see him. People didn't, and because people here were assuming that he was on the west side of Albuquerque, so people here in his own community didn't see him either, you know. So, I mean, I think it's also fair to bring up those fair criticisms too to his campaign, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like, you know, whether you live in CD2 or not, like, you know, people that might live there, and you know, people want to be able to see the representation.
Well, it's
and I'm not saying
interesting.
I'm not saying this is that I'm not going to support him. I'm not saying I'm not going to support him. I'm just saying it means that we as an organization have to do some work that the campaign may not be doing.
Yeah, and if I recall, they also had a pretty tight, you know, campaign. Like they didn't have the same. I think, you know, the first time he ran in, gosh, 2022, I think he had a bigger team, probably a bigger budget. This time it felt like it was a lot more scaled back, but you know, I don't know that for sure. That's just kind of like what I observed last year.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting hearing you guys talk about that, because looking at the data, that's where most of his votes came from. I mean, if you look at rural versus urban, that's where he won. So it's interesting to hear you gentlemen talk about that. So somebody needs to convey that to his campaign. Sorry.
Yeah. Well,
We've been trying.
presumably he has high-paid Washington consultants who are supposed to do that. So, okay, well, you know, we've gone over our hour. I gave us a little extra time because we kind of got started a little bit late, and nobody's really dropped out, which is terrific, because I think we're all very, very concerned about this. And we're just, any other questions out there? Like I say, I have 20 more, but I think I'll spare Lan and Luis. I'm sure they want to have dinner too.
Yeah,
And
and and you guys can always reach out to us. If you have questions, we can do our best to answer. I did want to say, there was a question earlier about, the so our partnership didn't include Indivisible. We've had conversations with Indivisible, and that's probably beyond my pay grade, and maybe even Lance's pay grade as well. But I think a lot of it has to do with like the status as well. Like our organizations on the NMS side are all 501c4s, and so I think like that might have had to do a little bit with it. But but we still work a lot with in partnership with other organizations in the area, right? Even if they're not directly in our coalition.
yeah, and we're hoping that we can, enlarge this friendship to a way that we can work together and cooperate and share ideas. I mean, we're really excited about that prospect in the future.
Yeah.
So, all right. So with that, host, now that you're host, Constance, you can
Finally.
bid us adieu.
Well, I've learned a lot, I have to say, this evening.
Hey, Zoom always still surprises
And
me with things.
for lots of, no, for Zoom and for you guys, it was very enlightening. Thank you for your time. You really have done a nice job, and I hope we have further relationships, because I think we are mutually interested in similar things.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good night.